Have you ever set an alarm for the early morning with the determination to wake up immediately, only to reach out and turn it off when it rings, telling yourself just 5 more minutes, but then 5 minutes pass, then 10, then 30, and eventually you rush out of bed, regretting not waking up on time? Procrastination is nothing new. Everyone has experienced that feeling of knowing what needs to be done, but not being able to start right away. You have an assignment to complete, but instead of sitting down to work, you scroll through your phone, watch another video, or read some trivial news. You plan to exercise, but then think, I'll do it tomorrow. You want to learn a new skill, but you always wait for the right moment. Day after day, procrastination becomes a habit, and you realize that what you want to achieve still sits idly on paper, never put into action. This doesn't only happen to you, it's a common issue for most people. We don't procrastinate because we don't know what matters, but because there's an invisible force holding us back. And the scariest part is, the more we procrastinate, the more paralyzed we feel. The first time you avoid a task, you might feel guilty. But if this continues long enough, you begin to accept it as part of who you are. You tell yourself that you're lazy, undisciplined, and unmotivated. From there, you fall into a never-ending cycle. Procrastinate, feel guilty, self-blame, then procrastinate again. But the truth is, procrastination doesn't mean you're lazy or incompetent. It's a natural mechanism of the brain. When faced with a task that requires effort, the brain immediately seeks the least energy-consuming solution, and procrastination is one of them. When you procrastinate, you are avoiding temporary discomfort. But what you don't realize is that the cost is much greater. The tasks pile up, opportunities are missed, and goals remain on the plan, never turning into reality. There's a sad truth. We often overestimate the future and underestimate the present. You believe that your future self will have more time, more motivation, and more energy. But the truth is, if you don't act right now, tomorrow will be just like today. And one day, you'll look back and realize you've wasted years just waiting for the right moment. So, how do you force yourself to act right away? How do you break the procrastination loop? The answer doesn't lie in willpower, but in how you change your mindset and environment. If you've ever thought that all you need is enough motivation to get started, now is the time to shift that perspective. Motivation isn't something that's just available. It comes from action itself. You can't wait for inspiration to strike before you start. You need to act first, and inspiration will follow. One important thing you need to understand: your brain doesn't like change. It always tries to pull you back into your comfort zone, a place where you don't have to exert effort or take risks. But that comfort zone is exactly what's holding you back. You might think that procrastination helps you avoid discomfort in the moment, but in reality, it's only accumulating more discomfort for the future. And in the end, the price you pay is the disappointment in yourself, the feeling that you're missing out on a life you could have had. The good news is, you can change. Procrastination isn't a fixed trait of your personality. It's a habit, and habits can be changed. But to do that, you need to understand how it works and, more importantly, have the right tools to control it. This book will not only help you understand why you procrastinate, but will also guide you step by step in removing it from your life. You'll learn how to force yourself to take action immediately, how to stay focused without distractions, and most importantly, how to turn action into a natural habit. If you've ever told yourself, I'll do it later, I'll probably be more motivated tomorrow, I'll wait until I have enough time, then now is the time to stop and ask yourself, if not now, when? Because each time you procrastinate, you're losing yourself bit by bit. But as soon as you start taking action, even if it's just a small step, you will notice the difference right away. Remember, there's no perfect moment to start. Only action right now. Part 1. Unlocking the invisible barriers. Procrastination is not just a behavior, it is a psychological response. When you know what you need to do but can't start right away, it's not because you're lacking ability or motivation, but because there is an invisible force holding you back. This barrier doesn't come from the outside. It originates from your thoughts, emotions, and the unconscious mechanisms in your brain. Before finding ways to act, you need to understand what is truly hindering you. If you don't properly identify the issue, you will remain stuck in the cycle of procrastination without finding a way out. There is a truth that many people don't realize. Procrastination is not a matter of time, but a matter of emotions. When you procrastinate, you are not avoiding the task itself. You are avoiding the discomfort that comes with it. If a task makes you anxious, stressed, or uncertain, you will unconsciously avoid it to protect yourself from those negative feelings. You might not recognize this clearly, but your brain understands it very well. It always prioritizes what offers immediate comfort, even if that means sacrificing long-term benefits. There are three main barriers that cause procrastination. The first is the fear of failure. If a task seems difficult or has a risk of not meeting expectations, you will subconsciously avoid it to prevent feeling disappointed. Rather than trying and possibly failing, you choose to procrastinate, telling yourself a valid reason, I haven't actually started yet, so I haven't failed. This protects your self-esteem in the short term, but harms your growth in the long term. The second is uncertainty. When you're unsure of exactly what to do or how to do it, you will feel confused and hesitate. The brain dislikes ambiguity, so it will lead you to more familiar, easier tasks, even if they are not what you need to do. This is why many people tend to clean their house, organize their desk, or check their emails when they need to tackle an important job. These actions create the illusion of being busy, but don't actually help you get closer to your goal. The third is the lack of connection to long-term benefits. Humans tend to prioritize immediate rewards over long-term gains. When faced with the choice of doing something now or enjoying comfort, the brain will lean towards the second option. You know that exercising will make you healthier, but the couch feels more inviting. You know that learning a new skill will benefit your career, but scrolling through social media is easier. This is not a matter of laziness, but a natural part of how the brain operates. The problem is, if you are not aware of these barriers, you will continue to think that you lack discipline or motivation. But in reality, it's not an issue of willpower. It's an issue of thinking patterns. When you understand what is truly causing your procrastination, you will find ways to overcome it. If you're afraid of failure, change your perspective. Instead of thinking that you have to be perfect from the start, view it as a process of trial and learning. If you're unsure where to begin, break the task down into smaller steps and focus only on the first one. If you feel disconnected from the long-term goal, find ways to make it feel closer, such as by creating small rewards for yourself after completing each task. Changing the way you think about procrastination is the first step to eliminating it. If you continue to see procrastination as a matter of willpower, you will only try to force yourself to work without truly addressing the root cause. But if you recognize that procrastination is the result of psychological barriers, you will be able to find ways to neutralize them. At that point, action will no longer be a struggle, but a natural choice. And once you unlock these invisible barriers, you'll realize that taking action is not as difficult as you once thought. Part 2. Breaking the procrastination loop immediately. Have you ever told yourself just 5 more minutes, only to realize you've wasted an hour without accomplishing anything? Procrastination is not an isolated action, but a loop. Once you allow yourself to procrastinate, it becomes a habit. And the more you procrastinate, the harder it becomes to get started. To break free from this, you cannot wait for motivation or inspiration. You must change how you make decisions from the very first moment. The procrastination loop starts with a thought. It's not the right time. When faced with a task, your brain immediately looks for reasons to procrastinate. You tell yourself that you need to prepare better, be in a better mood, gather more information, or simply that you don't have enough time to do it perfectly. But in reality, these are just excuses. What you think you need before you begin is not as important as starting immediately. The truth is, the more you think about something, the less likely you are to do it. When you let yourself get lost in thoughts, you overanalyze, exaggerate the difficulty of the task, and create unnecessary pressure. This leads to paralysis. But if you can break the loop as soon as it starts, you'll find that starting a task is not as hard as you think. The simplest way to do this is by applying the 5-second rule. When you feel yourself about to procrastinate, count backward from 5 to 1 and immediately take a small action related to the task you need to do. This rule works because it distracts the brain before it has a chance to come up with reasons to procrastinate. If you wait, your brain will automatically trigger negative thoughts and pull you back into comfort. But if you make a quick decision and act immediately, you'll break the procrastination loop before it takes control. One of the most common mistakes is thinking you need to do the task perfectly from the start. This mindset makes you feel overwhelmed and unwilling to begin. But in reality, you don't need to complete everything right away. You just need to take the first step. When you start an action, no matter how small, you create momentum that helps you continue. The key is to focus on starting rather than worrying about finishing. Additionally, you need to change how you perceive your task. Instead of thinking of it as a heavy responsibility, view it as an experiment. When you approach a task with a mindset of exploration rather than the pressure to do it perfectly, you'll feel less stressed and find it easier to act. This is especially important for creative tasks or those requiring high concentration. If you always demand perfection, you'll keep finding excuses not to start. But if you allow yourself to do it without setting unrealistic expectations, you'll move forward more easily. Another effective way to break the procrastination loop is by using the mandatory start principle. This means setting a rule for yourself that you only need to do something for a short period, like 2 or 5 minutes. The goal isn't to complete the task, but simply to begin. Once you've started, you'll realize that continuing becomes much easier. This principle works because it removes the pressure to do a big task from the outset. When you don't feel forced, you're less likely to procrastinate. Finally, to truly break the procrastination loop, you need to create an environment that encourages immediate action. If you always work in a space filled with distractions, you'll easily get caught up in unimportant things. Eliminate any elements that could cause procrastination and create a space dedicated solely to work. Additionally, establish a clear signal to alert your brain that it's time to work. It could be a small habit like opening your computer, sitting at your desk, or writing down a specific goal. When you repeat these signals, your brain will automatically recognize them and find it easier to switch into action mode. Procrastination is not a life sentence. It is just a habit, and habits can change. If you can identify the moments when you're about to procrastinate and immediately act before your brain comes up with reasons to delay, you'll gradually form a habit of taking action. Once you break the procrastination loop, you'll realize that taking action is not as hard as you think. The most difficult part is simply the moment before you start. Part 3. Act first, think later. Have you ever felt like you had no motivation to start a task, but after reluctantly starting, you gradually got caught up in it and continued working without forcing yourself? This is not a coincidence. It reflects an important truth. Motivation is not the condition for action. It is the result of action. One of the biggest mistakes many people make is thinking they need inspiration or to feel ready before doing something. This leads to an endless procrastination loop. You wait for an ideal state to start, but because you don't act, that state never comes. Meanwhile, those who are truly effective don't rely on inspiration. They understand that action doesn't follow motivation. Action is what creates motivation. The reason you find it difficult to start something is not because you're lazy or lack determination, but because your brain prioritizes comfort. When faced with a task that requires effort, your brain tries to avoid it by directing you towards easier activities, such as browsing social media, watching videos, or doing trivial tasks that are not important. But the key is, once you get through the initial phase and enter a working state, the boredom or heaviness will disappear. The most effective way to overcome this barrier is by applying the act first, think later principle. This means you don't allow yourself to deliberate too long about something, but instead you act immediately, even if it's just a small step. Once you start, your brain will automatically adjust your state to align with that action. If you don't believe this, think of times when you reluctantly started cleaning the house, but then found yourself getting into it once you began. This also applies to intellectual tasks. If you find it hard to focus on writing a report or learning a new skill, don't overthink the entire process. Simplify by setting a small task, such as writing the first sentence or reading a short paragraph. Once you begin, your mind will adjust according to your action, and you'll find it easier to continue. Another reason many people procrastinate is that they think they have to do something with high quality from the start. But the truth is, the end product is not as important as the process of starting. No one creates an excellent piece of work from the very first steps. Most things improve as you go along. So instead of putting too much pressure on quality from the beginning, focus on moving forward, even if it's just one small step. The best way to maintain action is by creating a chain of successive responses. When you take a small action, it triggers the next behavior in the sequence. For example, if you want to exercise but don't feel motivated, just commit to putting on workout clothes. Once you've done that, you might tell yourself that you'll only do a few warm-up moves. And once you've started the warm-up, it's highly likely you'll continue exercising. This process can be applied to any task. If you want to write a report, just commit to opening the document and writing a title. Once you've done that, it's easier to continue than if you kept waiting for inspiration. Additionally, avoid the temptation of just thinking about the work. Thinking about a task and actually doing it are two completely different things. When you only think about the task, you're more likely to get distracted, feel anxious, or exaggerate the difficulty of it. But when you start acting, you'll realize it's not as hard as you thought. So, instead of letting the task exist in your mind as a vague idea, turn it into a specific action immediately. Another important point is that you must accept that initial discomfort is unavoidable. Many people procrastinate because they wait for a comfortable state to start working. But no one feels completely comfortable when beginning a new task or a difficult job. The difference between successful people and procrastinators is that they don't let the initial discomfort determine their actions. They accept the discomfort as a natural part of the process. Once you understand that the feeling of not wanting to work is just a temporary reaction, you won't let it control you anymore. In summary, if you want to stop procrastinating and actually start, don't wait for inspiration or motivation. Act immediately, even if it's just a small step. Once you begin, you'll create motivation for yourself. The more you do, the more inspired you'll feel to continue. And when you maintain this habit, you'll realize that completing tasks is not as hard as you once thought. The hardest part is simply the moment before you begin. Part 4. Creating a system to eliminate procrastination. Have you ever felt disappointed in yourself when looking back on a day that passed without accomplishing anything meaningful? That feeling is awful. You promise yourself that tomorrow will be different, that you'll be more disciplined, more focused, but then tomorrow comes and everything repeats itself. You procrastinate again, waste time, and regret it. This loop not only makes you miss opportunities, but also erodes your self-confidence. When you fail repeatedly to get yourself to act, you start to think that maybe you're not strong enough, not determined enough, not disciplined enough. But that's not the problem. You haven't failed because you lack willpower, but because you haven't established a strong enough system to help you maintain action even when you're not motivated. People can't rely on willpower forever. Willpower is a limited resource, and if you keep forcing yourself to work, you'll quickly run out of energy. That's why you can be very determined in the morning, but by the evening, you easily give up. Successful people aren't those with extraordinary willpower. They're the ones who know how to create a system that helps them act without needing to struggle internally every day. This system consists of 3 key elements: environment, habits, and accountability. If you only try to change by reminding yourself to work harder, you won't be able to sustain it for long. But if you adjust your environment, build small habits, and create accountability that forces you to act, you'll find that starting becomes natural, almost effortless. The first thing you need to do is set up an environment that makes it easier to act. People are greatly influenced by the spaces they live and work in. If you want to focus on your work, but your desk is messy, your phone is within reach, and distractions are all around, you'll find it very difficult to stay focused. But if you organize a clean space, eliminate distractions, and prepare everything you need, you'll find it easier to get started. The environment is something you can control, And if you know how to use it, you won't need to constantly fight yourself to get to work. The second element of the system is habits. One of the reasons you procrastinate is that you haven't made action a natural part of your life. If you always have to think about when to start working, what to do first, or how to do it, you'll be easily distracted and hesitant. But if you build a clear habit, your brain will automatically follow the routine without requiring too much energy to think. To do this, you need to set a specific time for important tasks. If you want to learn a new skill, set aside a fixed time every day to practice. If you want to exercise, do it at a specific time. When an action is repeated at the same time every day, your brain will automatically recognize it as part of your schedule, and you won't have to struggle with yourself to get started. The third and strongest element is accountability. People tend to perform better when they know someone is monitoring them. If you rely solely on yourself to maintain discipline, you'll easily give up when you feel tired. But if you make a commitment to someone else, your likelihood of acting will be much higher. This can be done in many ways. You can find someone with the same goal to track progress together. You can publicly share your plans with friends, family, or coworkers to create pressure that forces you to follow through. You can also use external tools such as betting money or using tracking apps to ensure you won't easily quit. When you have an external mechanism to keep you in the game, you'll be less likely to procrastinate. One important thing to understand is that this system is not a form of coercion, but a form of support. It's not something that makes you feel restricted, but rather something that helps you achieve what you want more easily. When you have the right environment, clear habits, and a strong accountability mechanism, you won't need to constantly remind yourself to work. You'll naturally take action without having to struggle internally. If you're still skeptical about the effectiveness of this system, try reflecting on the things you've procrastinated on in the past. How many times have you actually completed something just by forcing yourself to do it? And how many times have you failed because you didn't have a clear support system? When you rely on willpower, you're always caught in a cycle of disappointment and starting over. But when you have a system, you won't feel like acting is a battle anymore. No one can maintain absolute discipline, but if you set up a smart system, you won't need to. You'll naturally do what needs to be done without putting in too much effort to fight procrastination. When you put yourself in the right environment, build small but sustainable habits, and create accountability to maintain responsibility, you'll realize that taking action is no longer a choice but a given. And when that happens, procrastination will no longer have a place in your life. Part 5, making action a part of who you are. If you constantly have to force yourself to take action, it means you haven't truly changed yet. A behavior only becomes sustainable when it becomes a natural part of who you are, without needing motivation, willpower, or continuous internal struggle to carry it out. But how do you reach that state? The answer lies in changing your perception of yourself. Try thinking about how you view yourself. If you believe you're someone who procrastinates, you'll act in the way someone who procrastinates does. If you think you lack discipline, you will continue allowing yourself to be lazy and give up when faced with difficulty. But if you change the way you define yourself, everything else will change along with it. People who don't procrastinate do so not because they have more motivation, but because they've developed a different identity. They see themselves as action takers. To make lasting behavioral changes, you need to stop focusing on results and start focusing on the person you want to become. Instead of thinking that you need to complete a task, think of yourself as someone who always gets things done. When this becomes part of your self-awareness, you won't need to force yourself to work anymore. You'll work because that's who you are, not because you're trying to achieve something in the short term. The key is that you can't just change your thinking through words alone. You can't simply tell yourself that you're disciplined and expect everything to change naturally. Self-awareness is formed through actions. Every time you choose action over procrastination, you reinforce your new identity. Every time you persevere instead of giving up, you prove to yourself that you are someone who keeps promises. And when these actions are repeated enough, you won't need to struggle to act anymore because it will have become part of who you are. An effective way to do this is by applying the small but consistent action principle. Instead of trying to change your whole life in one day, start with small steps that you can maintain consistently. If you want to be disciplined, make small commitments to yourself and follow through on them every day. It doesn't matter whether the task is big or small. What matters is that you keep your word. As you consistently do this, you will gradually change the way you view yourself. Additionally, you need to completely eliminate the all or nothing mindset. Many people procrastinate because they believe that if they can't do something perfectly, it's better not to do anything at all. But in reality, no one is perfect all the time. And what matters more is not the quality of one single attempt, but consistency. Even if you only do a task minimally, it's still worth more than doing nothing at all. A day when you're less productive is still better than a day where you don't do anything. When you accept that action is more important than perfection, you'll procrastinate less. Finally, you need to create clear cues to help maintain your action-oriented path. People tend to forget what they want to achieve when there are no reminders in place. If you want to build a habit of action, create triggers around you. These could be a specific schedule, a daily reminder, or a personal rule that you adhere to. When you consistently see these cues, you'll be less likely to fall off track. Conclusion: you only have two choices. Every day you face a decision. Keep procrastinating or take action right now. No one can change you unless you make that decision for yourself. You can continue waiting for motivation, but that means you'll keep wasting time, feeling disappointed in yourself, and missing out on opportunities you could have seized. But if you act now, even with just a small step, you'll find that things are not as hard as you think. Every change starts with one simple decision: to stop waiting. When you stop looking for reasons to procrastinate and start acting immediately, you will feel the difference in yourself. And when you maintain that long enough, procrastination will no longer be part of who you are. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to do everything all at once. You just need to start. And once you begin, you'll realize that action is not something difficult. It is natural, a part of the person you've chosen to become.